This is Heather with Bootleg Legal, and I wanted to start a conversation about something that's actually been on my mind for close to a decade, and it's an idea I've had for either a book or some sort of web page or even a Facebook group or just something for people with like minds on the subject. And so the overarching theme is stay small and go home. It's a play on the go big or go home. Or maybe stay small and stay home. And the idea behind this is really the promotion of small local economies. And that sounds simple and good, and everybody always pays lip service to this idea of shopping locally and supporting local businesses. But what I'm talking about definitely includes that, but it's sort of a bigger concept. And I'll tell you where it was born from. When I first came out of law school, I went to a big law firm and did all the things in big law, representing, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, and, becoming intimately familiar with the way that they run their businesses and handle disputes and treat their employees and treat their customers. And then, of course, even more relevant to my understanding of the way that large corporations work is my personal experience with large corporations. I've spent a lifetime having those frustrating phone calls where you have to press 18 buttons to get to a voice. And then they shuffle you around through half a dozen people hoping that you'll give up. And I've also known people who've been employed by big companies and seen how that they've been treated. So after a few years of working for corporate America, I started my own practice. And my practice was designed towards the small business just because it was a space I felt comfortable, to be honest. And it was also a space that I believed in. It aligned with my fundamental belief that we would do better if we started focusing on local economies. We started focusing on Main Street instead of Wall Street. And the reasons are many. First of all, large corporations, the people making the decisions for them are board members and executives. These board members and executives probably never meet employees or customers except maybe a few staged meetings a year or a few times when they actually go and meet the people on the ground delivering their services or their products. But it's not an everyday part of their life, and there's certainly not a situation in which there's relational equity where these Walmart employees have access to the owners or board members to even tell them what it is that they need or what's not working for them. So even if in those few maybe staged meetings, there's not a lot of real conversation happening. And there certainly isn't trust upon which conversations like that can flourish. And then, try, dealing with a large corporation whose service you don't like or have had a problem with. Oh, your cell service isn't working, or your, Verizon isn't honoring the warranty program that you purchased to go with your phone. The steps that you have to go through as a customer just to get what you paid for. Everyone who's ever tried to use insurance or warranty has probably faced this reality that it really does feel like they try to make it as difficult as possible to use the very services that we purchased from them. And I know I'm not the only one, and I know, especially with regard to large banks, they've actually been called to the carpet and have been found liable for essentially stealing money from their clients illegally over the years. There have been several judgments, and the CFPB has returned lots of money that was improperly taken by banks because they make it unduly complicated, and they make it very hard for their customers to actually use their services or their products in an efficient way or a way that works for them. So I saw the problem, but then what's the solution? Because we all need the things that Walmart sells, and we all need to have a banking institution. among other things. So what's the solution? So then I started representing small businesses, and what I noticed was this overarching theme where they really cared about their employees. And I don't think it's because they're inherently better people. I think it's because their employees have access to them. Corporate execs and corporate board members don't have relationships with the people whose lives are affected by the decisions that they make. Owners of small local businesses, they see it day in and day out. They see what wears on their employees. They see what excites their employees. They see what makes their employees feel valued. Sometimes they're not particularly good at it. I don't mean to paint all small business owners with a broad brush of being these noble bosses. Clearly, a lot of them are not. But they have a better chance at being a responsive boss when they are dealing with their employees on a day-to-day basis. Likewise with their customers. They have a better chance of being better business owners when they actually have face-to-face interactions with their community and with the customers that come in who have issues. And again, it's not to say that it's all smells like roses and that everyone always has perfect experiences with local businesses, but let's just say that they're much more sufficiently incentivized to keep you happy as a community member than, let's say, Wells Fargo is, okay? So I started having this idea to start this movement, this stay small and stay home movement, where it's more than just shopping at your local stores. It's building local businesses. It's investing in local businesses. It's prioritizing local businesses. I'm in a city right now, Redding, California, that's experiencing exponential growth, where we have, half a dozen, maybe a dozen big box stores coming in over the next 6 to 9 months. They're all being built right now as I speak, and that's fine. If they think that our economy can support that, but I think that if we prioritized local businesses, even if they were slightly more expensive, that money then stays in the local economy. So the perception that they're more expensive is almost a fallacy when you have small local economies, because let's say I buy a cheap pan from Walmart that's $20, and the vast majority of that money is going to go to the Waltons. And a little bit of it's going to trickle down to some of the employees that work locally here. But if I buy from, a local store that sells pans, and maybe I pay $30 for that same pan, but the entirety of that $30, aside from the cost of making the pan, so maybe, $25 or whatever, ends up going back into the local community. And it goes to a local business owner and local employees. And then they've got that money to then reinvest locally. And if everybody was really intentional about this, and everybody really prioritized spending locally, investing locally, giving more business loans to small local companies owned by people who actually live in the community, if we really made this really high priority, I think we could start to see a shift away from these big box corporate stores. And then COVID-19 happened. Wow. If we have ever learned, if we've ever had a reason to learn, actually, why we need more robust local economies, this pandemic showed us. First, it started globally. We started to see problems with even big companies here unable to get supplies that were sourced from China, because the vast majority of American companies manufacture in China. And when the pandemic started there, and manufacturers were shut down across the board, there was a complete inability to get a lot of the resources and products that our country relies on. And we didn't have a way to pivot and to, build them locally. All of our infrastructure is basically not all, but a significant portion of our manufacturing infrastructure is basically China. So it's not even our infrastructure, but that's where we make most of our products. So then all of a sudden you saw, wow, like if these types of things happen frequently, or if they last for a long time, we could find ourselves in a world of hurt simply because we've relied too heavily on this one place. versus relying on local economies. But then it even stems beyond just where we manufacture products. It goes to where we, like, everything that's having to be shipped is shipping slower. Even Amazon, right? I'm a 2-day Prime member. Nothing's coming in 2 days. Everything's coming in a week or two because of COVID, right? But if I was buying it from a local business instead, now some of these products, the few products I still buy on Amazon, I can't get locally. But if I could, I would. Not only would the money stay local, but I could go out and get it today instead of being at the whim of companies who are affected by these pandemics, right? So we're moving into a new world post-COVID-19. Anyone who thinks that life is just going to return to the way that it was prior to this pandemic is sort of not seeing the forest for the trees. We're going to have a new world because the pandemic is going to cause rolling shutdowns. This is what they're predicting anyway, that we may get this flare up under control in a couple months, but then it's going to flare up again in next November. And then we may have to have another 3-week shutdown. And then it might flare up again in January. And we might have to have another shutdown. So this is number one. They're anticipating that this is going to become a way of life. So we need to plan for it and build our economies around the idea that this may become a way of life. That's also going to render our economies particularly vulnerable because the ups and downs. This is a time more than ever when we need to be supporting local economies, if there's even going to be a local economy. If you don't want your entire town or city to basically be at the mercy of these corporate big box stores who might make sort of draconian decisions for what's best for their company with no regard for what's best for the individual communities in which their stores exist. They might have mass layoffs. Somebody, I forget which business here, just up and closed down one day without telling anyone in advance. They just shut down and laid everybody off, and everybody just went away, right? I can't imagine a local business getting away with that unless it was in dire circumstances. But we tend to hold our local businesses to higher standards because they're part of our community. So I think we need to consider, and I have by no means fleshed this out to the max. There's so much juicy conversation to be had here around these topics of how, number one, how do we do this? How do we really go back to local economies like, we had prior to mass globalization? How do we do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the economy that we do have, but it maybe is a slow, steady shift? How do we get buy-in from people that it actually is in their best interest to maybe spend a little bit more on your locally owned restaurant as opposed to the chain restaurant that's found ways to make everything cheaper? How do we sell it? How do we make that transition? How do we provide more opportunity for smaller local businesses? And then, what does that mean for our economy as a whole? I'm not out here trying to shut down Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies, but I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't hate it if they had less power over our federal government and our state governments, because right now we're essentially living in a corporatocracy. They can buy virtually any policy that they want to buy by hiring the right lobbyists, by making the right donations to political campaigns, and so on and so forth. So this would provide us with the added benefit of maybe siphoning off some of that power, right? Because if our spending was local and they weren't the behemoths that they are right now, they wouldn't have the power to really purchase our government out from underneath us. So on so many levels, this idea of staying home, stay small and stay home, and that growth for growth's sake isn't always good. We take that as a foregone conclusion that perpetual growth is good, right? It's a fundamental precept of capitalism. But what if it's not true? What if we build small businesses and they get big enough to meet the needs of their community, to hire enough employees, to make enough profit to where the owners live the comfortable, happy life that they want? People don't really need, They don't need 12 yachts. They don't need 2 yachts. All of the data out there on what truly brings happiness is so consistent that it is not money. Money brings happiness up to the point when it meets all of your financial obligations, which they say on an average is somewhere around $75,000, $80,000 in the US. Once you have that enough money to pay your obligations, excess money actually doesn't increase your happiness at all. But we all operate under this myth that it does, that more is always better, that making more means living better, living happier, living longer, all of these myths, right? What if we started to use the word enough? I have enough. I make enough. Because then what? Once you're making enough and you're giving back to your community enough, what does that really mean? That gives you license. It gives you permission to really invest the rest of your time in your family, your passions, your hobbies, your community, your church, because you've done enough over here. But under the current American mindset, there's no such thing as enough. You should always be hustling. You should always be growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. Even if you're a local business, you should be getting bigger and bigger. You should be scaling up. You should be getting to a point where you're now going into other communities, right? This is this mindset that we don't really question it because it's like such a strong part of our ethos, right? The country was founded on the Protestant work ethic. And essentially what that says is, as a character trait, we have tended to value hard work and productivity more than anything else. We measure character by how productive you are and how much you give back, right? The language we use to describe people who are differently abled, who may not be able to be as productive, is often hostile language because they're not producers in this community. And then the people like the billionaires we speak about, up until recently anyway, we would speak about in these glowing terms, like because of these huge producers of jobs and money. Like that's such a novel, wonderful thing. So I'm encouraging us to rethink that. I'm encouraging us to only take enough, to only keep enough. Keep what you need, make what you need, give back to your community, buy from your community, and let's start a real conversation about making economies local. And what it would take to actually get us there in a meaningful way, other than just, shop at small local businesses on Small Business Saturday, right? It's got to be something much bigger than that if it's really going to take hold. And I've sort of been waiting for an opportunity when I thought I might be able to get enough buy-in to start having this conversation. And when COVID-19 happened, I thought, I'm a firm believer that when anything negative happens, there's an equal and opposite positive if you just look for it. And I believe this might be one of the positives here, is that this might be the first real opportunity we've had in a long time to reorganize our economy. So let's be mindful about it and intentional. What do you think?